Hollywood has always sold dreams, but during its so-called golden age, those dreams were built on carefully manufactured lies. Behind the dazzling gowns, the velvet voices, and the glossy publicity shots, many of the biggest stars carried secrets. They weren't just acting in movies, they were acting every day of their lives, hiding pasts that didn't fit the industry's mold. What you're about to hear are some of the most shocking reinventions in Hollywood history. Stories where reality was erased and rewritten to please the camera. Merle Oberon, The Hidden Heritage. Merle Oberon seemed born for the spotlight. With luminous eyes and an air of aristocracy, she was every bit the glamorous star of the 1930s. But the story she sold to the world wasn't hers. She told interviewers she had been born in Tasmania, the daughter of wealthy British parents. In reality, her name wasn't even Merle Oberon. She was Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson, born in Bombay, British India in 1911. Her heritage was mixed Anglo-Indian, a background that Hollywood simply wouldn't accept at the time. The truth was too dangerous. Executives told her bluntly, "Erase your roots or forget about stardom." And so she did. She constructed a fake childhood of privilege, even dismissing real relatives who lived in Australia as if they were strangers. Her own mother had to play along in the cruelest way possible, posing publicly as her maid, speaking only in Hindi when others were around. Cinematographers went to extraordinary lengths to conceal Oberon's darker complexion. Lighting was adjusted to wash her out. Heavy makeup disguised her natural features. She even avoided the sun to maintain the illusion. And it worked. By the mid-1930s, Oberon was starring opposite Hollywood's most powerful leading men. She received an Oscar nomination for The Dark Angel in 1935, and later played Kathy in Wuthering Heights. But the lie always lurked in the background. In the 1960s, when journalists started digging into her supposed Tasmanian childhood, she abruptly canceled trips to Australia. She kept dodging questions until her death in 1979. Only later did researchers uncover her true birth records, and the revelation shocked everyone. The glamorous British aristocrat had been a girl from India hiding her own identity. Oberon's story is both extraordinary and tragic, a reminder of just how deep Hollywood's racial barriers ran, and the impossible choices actors had to make to survive. Joan Crawford, a name built on control. If Merle Oberon's secret was her heritage, Joan Crawford's secret was her entire past. Crawford began life as Lucille Fay Lesueur, a girl from Texas who grew up in poverty, working odd jobs just to survive. But by the time MGM introduced her to audiences, Lucille was gone. She had been transformed into Joan Crawford, a name chosen in a publicity contest she privately hated, comparing it to something that sounded like crawfish. Crawford didn't just reinvent herself, she buried her old life. She claimed she had attended elite schools. She let fans believe she came from privilege. The truth, an unstable family, rumored abuse, years of scraping by, was off limits. Even her stepfather's theater work, which likely sparked her love of performing, was minimized in the myth of the star she became. Hollywood demanded a fairy tale, and Crawford gave it to them. She presented herself as the ultimate screen goddess, poised, elegant, and always in control. But the cracks showed over time. She went through 4 marriages, battled with co-stars like Bette Davis, and became infamous after her daughter Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, portrayed her as cruel and controlling. Yet, through it all, Crawford never allowed the real Lucille to resurface. Even when whispers circulated about her past, she brushed them off. In the end, her myth-making succeeded. She became one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. But it's worth remembering that the woman audiences adored on screen was as much a character as any she played. Clark Gable, the steelworker who became a king. Clark Gable's image was that of Hollywood royalty. suave, commanding, the man who could melt hearts with a single look. But beneath the tuxedos and champagne, he was a steelworker's son from Ohio. Born in 1901, he lost his mother as an infant. His father expected him to stay in the oil fields, but Gable had other plans. In his early years, Gable scraped by doing factory work, oil drilling, and even selling ties. Nothing about him suggested a leading man. Then came Josephine Dillon, a theater coach who became his wife. Dillon transformed him piece by piece. She paid for dental work, drilled him on posture, and gave him relentless elocution lessons to strip away his working-class accent. The deep authoritative voice we associate with Gable wasn't natural. It was carefully built. By the time he broke out in the early 1930s, MGM had finished the job. They dressed him in tailored suits, buried his factory past, and turned him into the king of Hollywood. The public never knew about the sweat and grime of his early life. Yet Gable himself never fully abandoned his roots. Away from cameras, he preferred the quiet of his ranch to glamorous parties. He chatted with locals back in Ohio, buying farm equipment and reminiscing about his youth. Gable was a master of playing his role, but beneath the crown, the steelworker never completely disappeared. Rock Hudson, a studio's biggest cover-up. Few names sound more solid than Rock Hudson, and that was the point. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr., he arrived in Hollywood in the late 1940s as a shy, awkward man with a hard-to-pronounce name. His agent, Henry Wilson, gave him the ultimate makeover: a new identity, a sculpted image, and a name that suggested strength and permanence. Rock Hudson. The studio fabricated a backstory for him: a rugged Midwestern upbringing, Navy service, the perfect all-American dream. In reality, Hudson had worked odd jobs and struggled to find his place. But Hollywood wasn't selling reality, it was selling fantasy. That fantasy extended to his personal life. Hudson was gay, something the studio deemed incompatible with his heartthrob image. To silence rumors, he entered a brief marriage with his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates, in 1955. The timing was so convenient that it raised questions for decades about whether it was orchestrated by the studio. For years, Hudson played the part, keeping his private life tightly guarded while the public saw him as the ultimate leading man. But in 1984, the facade collapsed. His AIDS diagnosis made headlines and forced the world to confront what Hollywood had worked so hard to conceal. When he died the following year, Hudson became more than a movie star. He became a symbol of how secrecy and image-making had defined an entire generation of actors. Cary Grant, a life lived in disguise. Cary Grant was the embodiment of sophistication. Charming, stylish, effortlessly cool, but he hadn't been born into glamour. He began life as Archibald Leach in Bristol, England in 1904. His childhood was harsh, marked by poverty and a devastating family secret. When he was a boy, his father had his mother committed to an asylum without telling him. For years, young Archie believed she was simply gone. He wouldn't discover the truth until adulthood. At 14, desperate for escape, he forged his father's signature to join an acrobatic troupe. That bold move took him to the United States, where he reinvented himself completely. Hollywood had no use for Archie Leach, so he became Cary Grant. He trained his voice into a polished transatlantic accent, smoothing out the Bristol edges. At times, he even let people think he'd been born in America to dodge anti-British prejudice. The illusion worked. By the 1940s, he was one of the most bankable stars alive. But privately, he admitted the persona weighed on him. "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant," he once said. "Even I want to be Cary Grant." It was a rare confession that the suave figure on screen wasn't the man inside. He spent his life trapped in a role of his own making. Beloved, but never entirely real. Rita Hayworth, Erasing an Identity. Rita Hayworth was marketed as the ultimate love goddess, but she hadn't been born with that name or that identity. She came into the world as Margarita Carmen Cancino in Brooklyn in 1918, the daughter of a Spanish flamenco dancer and an Irish-English mother. From the start, her heritage was seen as a liability. Hollywood executives decided she needed to be fixed. Her mother oversaw painful electrolysis to push back her hairline, giving her a higher forehead that better matched Anglo beauty standards. She dyed her dark hair a fiery red, and her surname was swapped for Hayworth, a more palatable label for American audiences. On screen, the transformation was complete. She became a glamorous star, a pin-up adored by millions. Yet the disconnect haunted her. In one interview, she admitted, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me," referencing her most famous role. It was her way of saying that the fantasy everyone wanted wasn't who she truly was. Hollywood had forced her to erase her roots, and though she never publicly rebelled, her private comments revealed the toll it took. Tony Curtis, from Bronx Streets to Matinee Idol. Tony Curtis embodied Hollywood charisma, but he began life as Bernard Schwartz, the son of poor Jewish immigrants in the Bronx. His early years were filled with hardship, including the trauma of losing a younger brother in a car accident. When he arrived in Hollywood, casting directors thought his name was too ethnic. So Bernard Schwartz became Tony Curtis, a name lifted partly from a novel and partly from his mother's surname. He worked hard to soften his Bronx accent, taking speech lessons to transform himself into a smooth matinee idol. Studios encouraged him to keep quiet about his background, pushing him toward a generic, marketable image. And Curtis complied, at least at first. By the 1950s, he was a rising star admired for his good looks and charm. But later in life, he admitted openly that the pressure to hide his heritage had shaped him. "I had to hide who I was," he said, summing up not only his story but the experience of countless actors who came from immigrant families. Errol Flynn, the manufactured swashbuckler. Errol Flynn's life read like an adventure novel, and that was no accident. Born in Tasmania in 1909, he grew up the son of a respected academic, not the aristocratic explorer he later claimed to be. Expelled from multiple schools, he drifted into trouble and exaggerated exploits. By the time Warner Brothers discovered him, Flynn had already begun telling tall tales about wrestling crocodiles, striking gold in New Guinea, and living on the edge. The studio embraced the fantasy and amplified it, casting him as a fearless swashbuckler in films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. Audiences adored him, and Flynn himself leaned into the myth, living a wild lifestyle that blurred the line between man and legend. But eventually, the truth caught up. His autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, admitted that many of his adventures had been exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Still, by then the image was permanent. Errol Flynn was the dashing hero, whether or not he ever truly lived that life. Tab Hunter, the all-American facade. Tab Hunter was the 1950s dreamboat, blonde, blue-eyed, clean-cut. But the all-American boy was an invention. Born Arthur Andrew Kelm in 1931, he grew up a quiet kid who loved skating more than sports. That didn't fit the mold. His agent, Henry Wilson, rebranded him as Tab Hunter and built an entire identity around him. Warner Brothers marketed him through carefully staged romances with starlets like Natalie Wood and Debbie Reynolds. The public thought they were swooning over the perfect heartthrob. Behind closed doors, Hunter lived in fear. Being outed as gay in that era could end a career instantly. Gossip magazine Confidential threatened to expose him, and while studios may have cut deals to suppress the story, his career momentum slowed. Decades later, Hunter reclaimed his truth in his autobiography Tab Hunter Confidential. His story reveals the suffocating pressures of an industry that demanded actors be everything but themselves. Hollywood's golden age glitters in memory, but behind that shine was a system built on reinvention, erasure, and control. Merle Oberon hid her heritage. Joan Crawford erased her childhood. Clark Gable traded steel for silk. Rock Hudson was forced to live a lie. Cary Grant became trapped inside his own creation. Rita Hayworth endured painful transformations. Tony Curtis, Errol Flynn, Tab Hunter, all of them bent reality to fit Hollywood's mold. These weren't just actors performing in films, they were actors performing in life itself. The illusion was powerful enough to fool millions, sometimes even themselves. But the truth, when revealed, is often more fascinating than the myth. In the end, these stories remind us that fame has always come with a price, and for many stars of the Golden Age, that price was nothing less than their own identity.